Hi, hello. So before I tell you a little bit more about what my presentation is about, I'd like to take you somewhere. So just imagine this is not very clear because I think the projection is not too great. The image is not very clear. But just imagine that it's just before dawn in a city called Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, and the air smells of temple flowers and dust. And along the road to this great Bodhi tree, people are walking barefoot. They have left their shoes maybe a kilometer back or more, and some have traveled all night by bus. And a woman is carrying lotus buds wrapped in a damp cloth, which is this lady you can't see very well. So the tree that they're walking towards was planted in 288 BC, and it is the oldest tree on Earth planted by human hands whose planting date that we actually know. It has been watered, it has been guarded, and spoken to by an unbroken chain of people for 2,300 years or more. So I teach design at the University of Moratuwa in Sri Lanka, and last year I gave a group of our students who are specializing in media and communication design what may seem at the time to be an impossible task to brand this historic city. So the presentation that you're seeing today is what happened when they tried, and about what the city actually taught us in the process of doing this as well. Because what we did was we wrote the brief deliberately backwards. We wanted the students not to invent an identity for Anuradhapura, but to actually find the one that was already there. We added one more obligation, which turned out to really matter a lot throughout the process, is that once you think that you found this brand, go back and ask the community and the city whether you found it right. Um, so formally, the question that we were asking the students to do was this one: what is a participatory methodology applied in a historically layered, a multi-script, multi-community sacred city reveal about the relationship between script, between collective memory, and about place identity? But informally, the question was actually much simpler. When a city has been writing about itself for 25 centuries or more, who are we to actually hand a logo and a brand to this city? So a little bit of context, because I'm sure nobody has been to Anuradhapura before. Anuradhapura has been continuously inhabited for more than 2,500 years. 7,000 people live here today. It has schools, it has markets, traffic, homework, students. What I'm basically trying to say is that it's not a ruin with a fence around it. It receives over 1 million visitors a year. And this is one of the first numbers that really matter here because the majority of these visitors are not tourists and they're pilgrims. They're not coming to actually see the city, but they're coming to be in the city itself. And in its public space, you see about five scripts majoritarily. There's Brahmi, there's Sinhalese, there's Tamil, there's Pali, and there's English, and which are written predominantly by three communities sharing this one city across more than about 1,900 archaeological sites, which are there in this city. So if we take a look at a little bit of the history of this city, it was founded as the capital of the island's first kingdom in 4th century BC. The Bodhi tree that I talked about earlier was planted in 288 BC. The capital falls in 993 BC, and the city simply continues, gathered around its sacred core for about another 1,000 years or more. Then you see UNESCO coming in about 1982 and basically draws a line around what was already there and declares it as a World Heritage Site. But one of the most important lines in this slide is perhaps the last one at the bottom. The Brahmi inscriptions carved into its boulders in the 3rd century BCE. It records of donations, it talks about genealogies, it has dedications. And if you think about it, these inscriptions are probably the city's first brand communications. It has statements of identity and it's addressed to readers. and writers who they would never meet so many years ago. So today, there are two urban orders in the city. There's a sacred city on one end, which is bounded by the ancient moats. It's organized cosmologically, and there's predominantly Sinhala and Pali dominating the city, and the time basically runs on a pretty ritualistic calendar. And then you have the new town as well, which is a British era grid of offices and markets. It carries a full trilingual signscape of modern Sri Lanka, what you see today in the modern cities, and where time runs on the business week. So if you notice what actually separates this ancient city and the new city, it's not just a moat, it is also a script boundary. And you can tell where you are in Anuradhapura by what the walls are actually saying, and also in what alphabet it says it. So we found, as we went along in our research through this city, we found three anchors of this sacred city. The first one is the Bodhi tree that I started my talk with, which in Iliad's term, the axis mundi, the center around which all of this space is actually organized. And number two, we have the great Dagabas. And I want to be quite precise here. These are not just monuments, and they're placed across the city, throughout the city as well. These monuments are reliquary, and Jetavana Rame, which you see in the picture in the middle of this slide, is actually was the largest brick structure of the ancient world, and it was built to hold something very small and holy. And the third one is the tanks, the reservoirs. It's hydraulic engineering, 2,000 years old, and still waters the district today. So when we went about in our research, something one of the farmers said is at the bottom of the slide, and it really managed to shift our perspective as well. He said that water is not infrastructure here, but it is rather the identity of the city itself. If we come to take another closer look at the pilgrim city and the tourist city, the same streets actually hold these two different cities, right? It's just the perspective that is shifted. The pilgrim city is oriented to the tree, the Sri Mahabodhi and the Dagabas, and the tourist city is more oriented towards the museums and the heritage circuit. So this city would run on the ritual time and the other on the probably the itinerary time. And one's economy is donations and offerings on this side, and the others is probably tickets and hotels. One is written in Sinhala script and maybe Pali, and the other is written in Roman script. And the same dome in the city means two different things, right? For one visitor, it would be a cosmological orientation, and for the other, it could be just a photo opportunity. So a brand, as we walk through this project, that conflates either of these two cities would actually fail both of them. So as we once again went along the approach of doing this research, beneath the official story, beneath all of the ruins, the pilgrimages, and the UNESCO and the World Heritage Sites, we identified 5 communities whose stories rarely make the dominant narrative of what Anuradhapura is today. First, we had the monks and the novices, who are not caretakers of the sacred precincts, but are actual residents of this city. Then we had the tank villagers farming, still today, farming on a 2,000-year-old water system. And then we had the Tamil and the Tamil-speaking Muslim communities of the surrounding districts, for whom Anuradhapura is also their historic urban center, which in fact is a fact that our official heritage narrative, does not often say out loud today. We have the young people of the city who are growing up inside this heritage city, in this World Heritage Zone, who are switching between 3 languages a day and almost never ask what their city means for them. And finally, we also had these informal writers, the vendors, the pilgrims, the school children, the activists who come, the hand-painted signs, etc. So it was like a whole living signscape with it all, right? And these 5 stories are, not marginal to Anuradhapura's identity. It was, in fact, the most generative material that we found throughout this process. So as we come to the next part of this process, which in fact was, the question of how do you brand a city that has been writing its own story for 25 centuries, and who has the right to actually do it. So we went back to the literature, to see what we could find from the global arena and what scholars have done across these years. We didn't really find a very reassuring answer as well. So city branding, I've just put a little bit of a process of, going through the literature. We had Ann Hall's competitive identity in the 2000s, which, talked about a city as a portfolio of tourism, exports, culture, and governance. And in 2019, we see Bonakta and Odirac who review this entire field and find a recurring pattern of failure. And we had Kavratsis and Kalandits in the end who offer the reframe that we actually built our research on, who say to stop asking how to construct a brand for a city and how the city already produces identity through the everyday practices of the people who actually live there. And he talks about going from brand construction to brand discovery. So, in a sacred city, the stakes of getting this wrong are not really commercial, right? They're moral. You can commodify emotion and price a sanctity for the visitors. You can erase minority histories. You can present the community's past as a whole story. You can flatten this 25 centuries into a logo and a slogan, and it can really go drastically wrong. And in Sri Lanka, particularly with a history of a 26-year-old civil war, these were not abstract risks for us. So every decision in this project passed through these questions, right? What is the brand? Who decides on it? And who actually benefits from us? And participation was, in fact, the key feature for this project as a method. And it was one of the things that really took the project forward as well. So, a little bit of the framework for the project in terms of the four lenses that we looked at for this research. These four bodies, we've categorized it into the work that shaped how we read the city. First, we had the concepts of Iliad in sacred space. The inscriptions in the sacred precinct are not signage. It says they are cosmogonic statements. We looked at linguistic landscapes, where the language visible in the public space, how it reflects both, reflects and shape who a community is, and not only which language matters, but which script carries it as well. We looked extensively on urban legibility with Kevin Lynch. And if you look at Anuradhapura in particular, the landmarks are defined by the scripts that they carry. And of course, counter mapping was a big part of our project as well. We looked at work from Corner, Peluso, Hurt, and about the practice of making visible what the official maps leave out. And counter mapping was actually the whole method that we used for the whole project. So in terms of you know uh, demanding a different model of practice for this, not identity designed in isolation, but identity that emerges from listening. Not a community that is consulted late, but a community that actually co-authors. Not success that's measured in brand recognition, but success measured in whether the community owns the story being told about it. So coming on to the third part of the project, which is, what we actually did. So we had one semester, we had the third year media and communication design students. It was a research exercise in the form of a design project. And what's interesting was that they were not asked to create an identity, but they were asked to actually discover an identity and to go back to the city once again and, to see and ask from the communities whether they found it right. Um, so we had about 6 steps throughout the process. We started with the institutions because in Sri Lanka, the government institutions are the key players in terms of branding cities. So we talked to the Urban Development Authority. We had sessions. We talked to the Central Cultural Fund. And we immediately actually found a gap between the city in the planning documents and the city that the people actually live in. We also talked to historians who taught us in the process that the city's past, particularly in Anuradhapura, is not settled, right? And it is actively contested even today. We looked at theories, we looked at international cases, and only then we actually went in to do our field work in the city. So we documented the written landscape. We had structured sessions with monks, with farmers, with Tamil community representatives. We talked to the youth, we talked to vendors, and finally, we also had unstructured interviews in the participants' own language, which were transcribed into 3 scripts. So the fieldwork actually didn't produce any answers, but it actually produced the right questions that we needed to ask. So these are some more pictures of, some of the processes. There were a lot of going back and forth, consultations, documentation throughout these 6 steps that we did. So I just want to say how hard this listening part actually was, because participation has, become an easy word now. But we started off by, trying to understand and train the students in Spradley's ethnographic traditions, which begins with what he calls an explicit awareness of ignorance. I mean, you do not arrive as an expert, you arrive as a person who does not know. So there were no questionnaires of sorts. There were a lot of photographs of the city's writing that were laid out on tables. There were a lot of hand-drawn maps. And one question was at the center of all of this: what does the city's writing actually mean to you? And the answer that reframed the entire project came back almost immediately. We showed the residents and the communities pictures of the informal writing on their own walls, and they did not say, signage, or they did not say graffiti, but they basically said, this is how we, speak to each other about our city. So these are some of the photographs, the ancient most writing on walls to what you see today, to maybe 2 decades ago. So there's so many, different variety to it, because obviously there's a 2,500-year-old history over here. So if I'm to give you a little bit of examples of the actual things that we heard from the community there, a monk of the sacred city, when the students explained their project, said, which in fact, also gave us a lot to really think about. He said that the city does not need branding. It just needs people to come and be, quiet. A school teacher told us the curriculum has never really taught locals to be proud of their own city. A souvenir vendor told us if branding brings money to the city, it needs to reach the small stores and not just the big hotels that are coming up in the city. And the inscriptions themselves, spoke a lot. Among some of the most ancient Brahmi records were some of the earliest written records of women's names in Sri Lanka. It feels like some of the city's earliest narrators were more inclusive than some of its later narrators. So I'll move through quickly to the fourth part of the findings. So we came to basically 6 findings that I've categorized into basically groups of 3. So the first one was script in Anuradhapura is constitutive. It was not, decorative. The second one was no script has ever erased another. Every layer, in fact, addresses a different community across a different horizon of time. The third one was that naming in Anuradhapura was never neutral. So the sacred Bodhi tree that I started with is called Sri Mahabodhi in Sinhala. It's called Bodhi Ruka in Pali, carries different names in Tamil, and these are not translations of each other. They each carry different relationships to each other because of this living tree. So if I, go through the palimpsest of the layer by layer, we had Brahmi inscriptions at the bottom. We had Pali, the liturgical layer. We had the Tamil Grantha in the medieval period, besides Sinhala, with their community presence that were carved again in stone. As we move forward, we have the Roman inscriptions, the layers of the Portuguese, Dutch, and the British who are there, and the modern trilingual streets of Sri Lanka as well. And then we also had the fourth finding, which was the community is the custodian of the city. of this identity and not the audience. The fifth one was that the pilgrim and the tourist inhabit structurally different cities, as we spoke about earlier. And the sixth one was what we didn't expect, what the students didn't expect, that the brand already exists, right? So I'll quickly come to what the um, what we identified through the students' work and the compilation of all of these. Um, so we had a color grammar that was emerging through this visual clutter and arrangement of it. We had a typography, different typographies emerging across time. We also had a marker system where the Bodhi tree, the lotus flowers, the Dagaba silhouettes tried to, bring us visuals of that identity worked. So these are some of the sessions we had, going back and forth, all of these. Um, so this is basically what the students actually made of it. We had 5 groups and divided into 5 groups based on how they thought about this. One group had a campaign that is proud of its heritage, an identity built from the city's geometry of the circle, triangle, and moonstone. We had word marks holding Dagaba and a seated figure in a single line. We had an interesting one that talked about the Mula Bhumi, or the original ground. We also had the city of mindfulness. So 5 positions, it was all one method, but all of them sourced from the same act of listening. And every one of these thoughts began from something the community or the residents actually said. So quickly coming to the conclusion part of it, if I can actually compress this whole project into 2 sentences, which is what is on this slide. Anuradhapura does not need a brand to be designed. It needs an existing brand to be read. So city branding in a place like this is not only design, it also becomes a translation of sorts. So we had 3 propositions by the end of the project from the findings. So I want to stress these are not, design solutions per se, but these are conditions that any design solution must really satisfy going forward, whoever who wants to brand the city. One was to root the brand in the grapholinguistic reality of the city. Its typography, its color, the compositions must derive from what is already written there. Sorry. And 2, to build a multi-script system. No single script can actually represent this entire city to all of its communities. So the system must say which script speaks to whom in what setting without imposing a false hierarchy. Third one, to position the community as a custodian. The brand must be owned, maintained, and elaborated by its residents themselves. So these are also 6 principles that we came up with, to any one of the practitioners who would want to undertake this task. Listen before designing, name in every language the city speaks, serve the pilgrim and the tourist, conflate neither, make the community the author, not the subject, acknowledge the contested, a brand that pretends consensus will actually fracture in this space, and hold the complexity, because complexity in this space is what really matters, right? Um, so 3 final reflections was first to actually understand that participation is usually defended on moral grounds. So our strongest argument was for it is epistemic. And the findings really consistently surprised us. And through this surprise, we knew that the knowledge that surfaced through the project was actually real. The project sat somewhere between co-design and genuine community-led work. And the most valuable thing that I think the students came across was that the restraint that they had. They began the project thinking about coming up with a visual identity. But they realized that, without years of trust building and real linguistic fluency, it's, not really that easy to come up with a visual identity. So I'll skip to this, the final slide, basically. I want to start off I want to end the presentation where I actually started off, right? On that road where the pilgrims come towards the sacred tree Mahabodhi at dawn. So the woman that we spoke about in the beginning with the lotus buds, she will reach the Bodhi tree after a walk of about 1 kilometer when the sky turns pale. She'll put down her flowers on a ledge that has held flowers every single morning for more than 2,000 years. And around her, on the boulders, on the stones, there's writing that is older than the idea of Sri Lanka itself. And she is not the target audience, of this process. She's actually the author, one of millions of probably the longest unbroken act of placemaking that we came across. So Anuradhapura has actually outlived every empire that it has ever tried to speak on its behalf. And for 25 centuries, it has been actually writing, its history itself in stone, then in ola leaf, in chalk, in paint, in different scripts, 5 scripts that we saw in different languages by every community that has ever called it home. So each generation has had a line to add to this story, and none of them have been actually been able to erase the previous lines that were written. So the city's story is actually written. It did not need us to tell who it is. But the one real question for us designers, us branding practitioners, us researchers, was to actually study this and find out and, be able to willingly learn and read the city. With that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? We have just a few minutes before we go to lunch, and we can continue this conversation over lunch.
Thank you so very much for this rich and very insightful perspective on not branding, but bringing out what's actually there. I wonder how you can share that with the world and export that, not export, but share this quite different approach to other places that might need it. What are your plans for the future?
So one of the main reasons we actually approached this was that Sri Lanka right now is being, as most of the global South cities right now, they are being branded or, they're being targeted as tourist destinations. And now we see over the last 2 months, we've seen 4 tenders being put forward by the government of Sri Lanka, 4 key cities to be branded, and they're being handed over to agencies, people coming in. What we wanted to do was actually, they're very commercial projects, right? So you won't see the community perspective coming in. So we wanted to bring this conversation forward so that the community stories will have a place before they actually get branded, right? So what we're doing as researchers right now is we are taking few cities like this. Right now, we are doing a project in down south as well, in the southernmost part of Sri Lanka, where we use counter mapping as a method to get the stories of the communities out. Because most of the cities have a dominant narrative where, if you Google it, you'll have a story for it. But there are so many hidden stories within as well. We wanted to bring those stories. So we're actually doing few projects here and there, and maybe through these conferences, people will get to know, and maybe we'll have more places to talk about this and to bring these stories out. I hope that answered your question.
I got some, but I want to make sure everybody else. Okay. I have 2 questions. One was, I think you mentioned that you were able to share the results with the community.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how the community responded, because you had so many different results from the different groups of students. So how did that go?
So very mixed reactions from different parts. So as part of our counter mapping exercises, after the initial fieldwork research was done, we with the students designed some critical probes, right? Some initial branding things from the research that we found. And we took those back to the community. So there are so many different parts. There's the monks, there's the vendors, the pilgrims. So we spoke small informal discussions and spoke to them, trying to provoke their reactions and trying to get their stories. So there were a lot of mixed reactions. Some they did not like at all. They said this was wrong. So that was also actually our feedback in order to develop. So those initial critical probes that we designed, mapped again with the community, then back to the studio, again, discussions and critiques. And then so there was a few back and forth sessions. And obviously, it's nothing that you can finish in a few months, right? So it's an ongoing discussion of sorts. Yeah.
Now, my second question was just, how do you, having gone through this, sit with the word brand at this point? Because I mean, I remember I was doing a similar thing.
Yeah.
And somebody just reminded me how violent the word
Yes,
brand is.
yeah.
And so I like, you have counter mapping.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's like a new term or like a discursive way of
Yeah.
like
We want to.
framing it. You used identity too, so I was just curious how you feel
Yeah,
about
we
that.
want to let go of the name brand. In fact, maybe something like visual identity or something. But we are also, I mean, I don't think brand is the word for it, It
Right.
needs to be more inclusive, more authentic. But I think we need to work on that in terms of finding what that really is.
Yeah.
And obviously, it will change from place to place, also very diverse, places different cities have. So
Yeah.
we'll have to, going forward, think about what it means.
Yeah, very cool.
Can I just say how much I agree with that? Because like the brand is something, is the ownership that comes
Yeah.
from the outside violently placed on the skin. And what you're doing is very nuanced and
Yeah.
sensibly bringing out from inside. So it's the opposite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
even though like custodian feels much more like caretaking or stewarding versus governing, or like telling, and even like it seems like it needs to be plural more than singular as well.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
It's multi-voiced.
yeah,
I would say that we will have a different set of issues when it comes to the global south.
Yeah.
When we go into the politics of it, and then, how do we change something which they think they know? And then, so that's also like a huge challenge, I think. Like, I'm just simply thinking the tender itself, we'll always say city branding.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just will kill the whole idea, and then you wouldn't be able to fight it unless we speak up louder.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such and people say they mean a logo, but they say brand. Like brand is just it's just the short phrase, it's the easy way to say it. Yeah, it's tough to fight.
But we should.
Yes.
We will. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Most welcome.
Thank you.